So when things wrapped up in Winfield, Kansas, we started to hit the real meat and potatoes of the trip. We crisscrossed back across the country, back across the United States, to McClure, Virginia, for Ralph Stanley's homecoming festival, which was up in his home place basically on the top of a mountain. And like that, this trip was instrumental. There's so much punnage. This trip began my love affair with being on the road, and also my love affair with the United States, seeing the country, from behind a windshield, driving, thousands of miles. It was breathtaking. Like I had never seen anything like it. It's like you see the United States, you see America in movies and pictures and things, but nothing compares to going there and seeing it. It's the same thing with Canada, I would find out later on. Or anywhere in the world. Photographs and video and film don't do anything justice. And so there we were traveling across the country, and it was a weird, surreal trip because Bill had control of the purse strings. I think we were carrying traveler's checks or something, American Express traveler's checks. And Murray had to keep going to Bill asking for money for this, that, and the other thing, but mostly food. The idea of the trailer was that, because Murray was a deft cook. The idea of the trailer was to have a kitchen so that we could, carry our own food. But that soon got pretty old fast because the propane fridge was leaking and it stunk, and everything you put in there started to stink. So even the sandwich meat started to taste like rotten eggs from the gas leaking. I'm surprised we lived through the trip. And so Bill was convinced that we could live on soup, canned soup. We'd be going to a grocery store and he'd buy, 10 cans of chicken noodle soup. Goddamn, you're starved to death. And so Murray wasn't having that. He was like, we were ending up stopping at different places to have a decent meal, And I guess a few times we had motel, one room we'd stop at so we could all have a shower and stuff. There was a shower in the travel trailer. It was a big travel trailer. It was 25 or 27 feet long. but Murray couldn't fit in it, so, and I could barely fit in it. I was only a thin little guy. So that's how we sort of made our way back across the Midwest up into Virginia to go to Ralph Stanley's homecoming. And I was about to get my eyes opened in there too, quite a bit. The first thing I learned from going to McClure, Virginia was never drive a Buick land yacht hauling a 27-foot trailer up the side of a mountain in Virginia. Oh my God, I near shit in my clothes about 15 times going up that mountain. Because it literally there was no guardrails anywhere, and it was literally a dirt road going up to the top of this mountain, and the drop-off was 300 feet. And it was terrifying. And they were bringing tour buses up there. The bus drivers must have been having a heart attack as well. And but we made it. We made it up there. And of course, I got to see Ralph Stanley and the Clinch Mountain Boys. In their home environment, which was very interesting. At the time, Ralph had a guitar player named Junior Blankenship. And the Clinch Mountain Boys always had a lead guitar player. I can't remember if that's where George Shuffler came from. Maybe. I'm sorry. I'm having a bluegrass brain fart. But there always seemed to be a lead guitarist in the Clinch Mountain Boys, and I remember going down backstage again, like balls of steel, Johnny, right? And there was this huge, long staircase. It was a natural amphitheater where the stage was in this place. It was a beautiful park, and there was this huge natural amphitheater, this massive, steep hill all the way around, and the stage was down at the bottom. And you had to walk down this massive, long wooden steps down to the stage, and across a boardwalk, and into the back there. And I remember going down there and meeting Junior, and he was playing an old Martin D28. I think it was a 28. It might have been an 18, but anyhow, I think it was a 28. And the back was split, like wide open. The two pieces of the back were just flopping there. They were nearly falling off the guitar, and he was still playing it. It was crazy. I couldn't believe it. It started to occur to me. I started looking at these guys, and I was thinking, these fellas don't have, real good instruments. They don't smell so good. They're working hard. They're not even getting a bath. They don't have enough money to repair their instruments. Like, maybe there's not a lot of money in this, right? And it kind of took me by shock a little. It shocked me a little bit that somebody as famous as Ralph Stanley, in those days, they were struggling. All of them were struggling. Like, it was, and I didn't realize that. You look at, I was listening to their records, and I was hearing the Osborne brothers and Bill Monroe and Ralph, and a lot of these guys showed up at festivals, and you could tell that they were quite possibly living hand to mouth. They didn't look it. They would pull into a bluegrass park and be driving a Silver Eagle bus, probably worth $100,000. But they had invested all their money in that. That was the thing that they needed. It was almost a status symbol. You pulled up to a festival in a bus and you were taken seriously. Is something that I started to learn at that point. It was like, there was more to the status symbol of the bus than having enough money to fix your blown out Martin guitar with the back falling off of it, right? Like, it was just surreal. It was very strange, and but they were incredible. What a band! Holy God, it was awesome to watch Ralph play, and he was in his prime then, I think, and that was about 1985. It was a great band. Curly Ray Klein on the fiddle, and his longtime bass player there, Jack, I think his name was. Can't remember his name. I mean, the bluegrassers will tell me. I'm so outside that world, and it's 30 years ago. I'm 35 years ago, so I'm drawing a blank on a lot of this stuff. But so yeah, it was interesting to watch all of it, and of course I wandered around the park as much as I could and picked with people, but I found the people that were at that particular festival were a little bit standoffish. It was really a cloistered. They were all mountain people. You know what I mean? Like, it was that kind of a feel, and there was a lot of local people there. There was a few people from away, obviously visiting. It was crowded, but it didn't feel quite the same as, none of these festivals felt the same as they did at home. And rightfully so. That you're talking about a different culture and a different place altogether, just miles apart. You're in Ardoise in Nova Scotia watching Canadians emulate bluegrass players. Then you're in McClure, Virginia, watching one of the fathers of bluegrass. It's a different world. They're not connected, almost. And I should say as well at this point that this wasn't my first, obviously wasn't my first encounter with American bluegrass. And I have to credit somebody here. There's a musician up in New Brunswick, Moncton, New Brunswick, named Eddie Poirier. And in the 60s and 70s especially, late 70s, early 80s, he came down from Ontario. He was from Moncton, I think, and originally. And he came down to Moncton. He started a bluegrass band up in Ontario called the Bluegrass Four. And it was the very first, pretty well the first bluegrass band commercially successful band in Canada. And the very first one that ever came to the Maritimes where the players were living here. And they were incredible. They were incredible. And they put a record out that's now today considered a classic of Canadiana. It was so because he came down in those early days and started bluegrass festivals and everything in the Maritimes, almost single-handedly created the whole market. Thank God for Eddie Poirier. And he opened the door to make the Maritimes an actual touring stop for some American groups who were coming into Canada. And so because of him, that's the reason why the market was open for people like Doc Watson. And I also saw Ralph Stanley at the Cohen before I saw him in McClure. And I saw also Del McCoury came to a tiny fire hall outside of Bridgewater one year, and I went to see him in this packed fire hall, and he blew my mind. I'd never heard of Del McCoury. Murray took me to see him, I'm pretty sure. And then also I saw one of the most magic shows I ever saw of a bluegrass band was I went to see Joe Val in Parkview Education Center, where I would later end up going to high school. And I saw Joe Val at Parkview and met him and met the whole band, and they were, good Lord, it was incredible. It was incredible to watch the difference. And in those days, it was very clear that the Americans had invented this music, and they were worshipped by us players. Like today, you can find Canadian players that are at the same level as American players and beyond. But in those days, it was a fledgling art here. We were just finding our way, and you had people like Ray Legier and Frank Duty and Eddie and Fern Maillet, Danny Maillet. Like, those people were on the cutting edge of the music back then. But when you saw an American band, you realized we had a ways to go, And it was an interesting time to watch the Canadian contingent, grow and age and become something that it is today. Like the bluegrass scene in Canada is very strong, with a tremendous amount of players. So anyhow, there we were, in McClure. Everybody, and I mean everybody, was waiting for. I mean, we all love seeing Ralph, of course, and there was a few. I don't even remember who the other bands that were there. I don't remember them. That's sad, but of course I remember Ralph. But everybody was waiting for Ricky Skaggs to show up. Now, of course, the history between Ricky and Ralph. I mean, Ricky Skaggs and Keith Whitley. It's Whitley, you dick. Jesus. Both were in the Clinch Mountain Boys at the same time at one point when they were teenagers. So there was a massive amount of history between Ricky and Ralph. And at this time, in 1985, I think this was, Ricky Skaggs was the biggest country star on earth. He was, and I've run into Skaggs, so many times in my life. And he's an enigma, Ricky. But an incredible musician. This man altered the whole course of country music by basically electrifying bluegrass and drawing from that pool of material and proving beyond a shadow of a doubt, if it was played with drums and electric bass and a bunch of other acoustic instruments thrown in, and sung properly with the right harmonies and all this stuff, he proved to the world that the bluegrass idiom was not only marketable, but it was worth a fortune of money. This guy sold, like, his first couple records he put out on Epic when he went country, right? He sold millions and millions of albums. Like, this guy was a god. And rightfully so, because the man is one of the best bluegrass musicians who's ever lived. There's just no way around it. And so in comes Skaggs' bus, right? And everybody freaked. This huge silver eagle, I still remember it. It was, the silver on it was actually gold. It was gold, and red on the top, and gold on the bottom. It was electroplated. It wasn't silver. It was crazy. It was now that could be a false memory, but I'm pretty damn sure it was it was not painted silver on the metal part. The chrome parts were gold, and it was a huge silver eagle, and they pulled in. Now, at the time, we didn't know this, and this there's going to be lots of this in this story, because I unfortunately have encountered similar things, but there was some people harassing Skaggs at the time. Well, worse than harassment, stalking and death threats, and there was a weird thing going on, and Skaggs, of course, was trying to protect himself and his family, and so we hung around hoping to see him, and of course did not when he pulled in. So we knew when he was going to play on the stage. So we went to the top of these stairs, where there was a whole bunch of people sitting. They sat on the stairs all the way down to the stage. So we sat near the top, hoping that we could meet him as he came by to go on stage and play. He was going to play with Ralph. And sure enough, we heard the murmurings around us. Oh, there's Skaggs, right? And we heard the feet coming down the stairs behind us. And I started to get up. And when I did, a shotgun barrel came down over my shoulder. And a voice said, "Stay seated. Please stay seated, sir." And the shotgun was on my shoulder, pointing at the ground in front of me. And Skaggs squeezed between us, walked down in front of us. And as soon as he was past us, this armed, uniformed security guard took the gun off my shoulder and kept going behind Skaggs. That was an eye-opener. Scared the shit out of me. I couldn't believe it happened, but it did. He showed up there under armed guard. That was another eye-opener. It was like, okay. So you get a guy who's a great musician, and, I mean, I still remember exactly where I was the morning after John Lennon was shot. And I remember who told me. I was in class, in school, in Ontario, and I turned around at my desk, and this girl, I'll never forget her, and everybody had a crush on her. She was a pretty girl, and her name was Sue Moffat. And I turned around to Sue, and she goes, "John Lennon's dead. Someone shot him last night." And I couldn't get my head around that. And it was years before I, got the whole story about why this maniac killed John Lennon. But up until that moment when that shotgun came down over my shoulder, I never equated that type of problem to anyone else. Like it never occurred to me that someone like Skaggs, who was not a rock and roller and not a controversial act or not a, you know what I mean? Like and I thought, my eyes popped open and I went, this is a problem artists have across the board, perhaps. That there's, and I was learning all these things and absorbing them and observing them, and just, it was really weird and surreal, and I didn't know how to feel about it. I was a little angry because I really wanted to get up and shake Skaggs' hand and talk to him and whatnot, but I didn't get to. And the reason was because at the time I understood that there was somebody threatening to hurt him. And that just didn't make any sense to me. But I started to, as years went by, I started to see, just how messed up people can get. And I mean, I went through some of this myself over the years, and it's frightening. So, anyhow, that was such a strange introduction to Skaggs with a gun over my shoulder. Sadly, the following year, Skaggs' son was shot in the face on the interstate highway up in Kentucky by apparently somebody, a trucker with road rage. I mean, holy shit. I mean, the little boy, he survived, but he got shot in the face by a total stranger. And imagine the terror and paranoia that causes when you're already, potentially under some threat from nutcases. I mean, I can't even imagine that. It just boggles the mind, frankly. So, anyhow, we loved what we saw. It was incredible. And after that festival was over, we started to head south, and of course the car broke down on the way out of McClure. We get stranded in a gas station for 3 days, waiting for a part, and that was fun. We ended up playing music in the parking lot of this gas station for 3 days, and there might have been another festival somewhere along the way, and I can't remember. Some of this I can't remember because it was a whirlwind trip. It was just really and very surreal. Like, I was experiencing so many things at that point that I couldn't catalog all of it. It was crazy. And I remember then we headed for New Orleans. Murray wanted to see New Orleans. I think it was a weekend that there was no festival in the schedule, so we decided to go to New Orleans and spend the weekend there, because the next festival we were going to was just across the state line in Mississippi. So we went to New Orleans and did the tourist thing in the French Quarter and got scammed by all the street tricksters. I bet you $1 I can't tell you where you got your shoes. Okay, you got them on your feet. There goes $1, and ended up in one of these shopping channel type live shows where the guy comes out with a headset mic on, and he's got all this garbage on these tables, Amway stuff and whatever, and starts hawking to the crowd about, if you buy this, you'll have a chance to do this later on in the show, and blah 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 blah. And of course, Murray went in there and bought $100 worth of trinkets and came out with nothing. And it was just really funny. It was a tourist trap, right? But it was fun, and we it was amazing. I saw the French Quarter and walked around that place and heard the music and heard, stuff I just never would have imagined ever being able to hear, coming from where I came from. And then the most fateful thing on the entire trip occurred. We left New Orleans and headed to a tiny spot in the map in the state of southern Mississippi, way down south there, the southern part of the state, a little place called Wiggins, Mississippi, and it was called the Magnolia State Bluegrass Festival. Well, it was put on and hosted by a bluegrass gospel band called the Sullivan Family. Now, there's a lot to be said about who these people were. I had no idea who they were, and I didn't even really find out sort of much about them initially, except the music they were playing was kind of blowing my mind. And of course, it was all gospel, and a lot of it was really up tempo. You had so what I was confronted with when I saw these people hit the stage, and I also saw that weekend for the first time the Osborne brothers. They came, and the Bluegrass Cardinals came on that weekend and played there, and I got to sit right in front of the stage and watch these two bands that just I was a massive fan of, and they absolutely blew my mind. And so you have this band, the Sullivan Family. You have Enoch, and there's no other way to describe this guy. He was the most charismatic frontman that I'd ever witnessed, ever, up to that point. A great, huge man, like 6'4", built like a movie star, and he had hair and sideburns like Elvis, except it was snow white. Like this brilliant white hair and this little kind of a Clark Gable mustache, all white, just snow white, blazing white hair. And he played the fiddle, and he was a good fiddler. He played he just was a good old mountain fiddler. And then you had his wife, Margie, who by all accounts was a bit of a local kind of well, I shouldn't say local, because I'll get to that in a second, but she was a regional superstar. She was one of those, she came up as a kid singing and became incredibly popular, and she was a very, very good singer, and she played the rhythm guitar. Now, and then there was the bass player. She was a young girl from Louisiana who I didn't understand the relationship there at that time, but she was a fairly good upright bass player. She wasn't a great technician, but she had good timing. And so that was the core of the band. And then there was a banjo player, I think might have been a guy named Mike Bailey, who played with them from time to time. So I saw the band without one of the key figures in it, which was Enoch's brother, Emmett, who was the banjo player normally. And they had no mandolin player. But they were incredible. The vocals and the arrangements and the way and just the way that they were dressed to kill, like full suits, like beautifully tailored suit he was wearing. Margie with her giant Pentecostal, what turned out to be a wig, I didn't know at the time, but this giant beehive Pentecostal hairdo, and in a sharp dress, and Joy, the bass player, Joy DeVille, in a dress. And this banjo player kind of dressed in dress pants and a white shirt and a tie, and just a kid, and they blew me away, and I was like, wow. And so this was the first one of the first. Well, it wasn't the first one, but it was one of the many festivals where I would go to the stage with my tapes and ask to play in between sets or right before supper break, or right before, or whatever, like any way I could get on stage. And so I went down there, and there was some radio guy emceeing, and I played for him. I said, I'm from Nova Scotia, Canada, and blah, blah, blah. And he said, of course you can go up and play a set. So I ended up going up doing a full 45-minute set during the supper hour, which was really cool. And I sold a bunch of tapes, and I had done this all the way along, through the whole trip. And I know I ran into the Sullivans backstage, and they started talking to me, and Enoch seemed quite interested in me because I was a young kid. I was 16 years old and was a fairly good guitar player for 16. And we met and talked, and he was very nice and just a real Southern Alabama guy. These guys were from Washington County, Alabama. They were 50 miles north of Mobile in a place called St. Stephen's. And so anyhow, that was fine. And then I was up at the trailer, and I started talking to one of the people that was working at the festival, and they mentioned that Enoch's normal mandolin player, whose name was Steve Carpenter, was out on a dentist appointment. And the guy said, he was doing quotation. He's gone to the doctor, the dentist. And come to find out that they had him and Enoch had a volatile relationship, and they'd had a falling out before the festival, and Steve didn't show up for the gig. So I got it in my head, well, I'm going to go down there and see if they need a mandolin player, because Murray had brought his Area Pro 2 F5 mandolin with him, and I was, tinkering with it. I was no mandolin player. Went down to the stage and said, I play mandolin. Do you need a mandolin player? And Enoch said, well, why don't you come down backstage just before the show, we'll play a couple tunes and see, So I ran up to the trailer. I pulled the mandolin out. I had already memorized, most of their material from hearing their one or two sets I'd heard, and I went through they played a lot in B flat, A, D, and so I went through all the chords I needed to chop rhythm and some licks, in every key I thought they'd play in. And this happened over 30 minutes. And then I ran back down to the stage. I looked at Murray and said, I'm going to go play with the Sullivans. And he was like, what? What the hell? What do you mean? He didn't even know what was going on, right? And he just laughed at me. And so down to the stage I went, about half an hour before they're supposed to go on, pulled the mandolin out, put it up. I mean, I didn't have very good clothing. I had what I had. I put on the nicest stuff I had. And he said, okay, well, let's play a tune. So he starts out with a tune called Using My Bible for a Roadmap, and it was a ripper in B flat of all keys. Well, I made it through the tune. I chopped good rhythm. I took a solo, which didn't suck that bad. And after it was over, he looked at me and said, well, why, sure, son, you're more than welcome to play with us. We'd love to have you. And that's how it started. I got up on stage with them that night. I played with them. I played with them for the rest of the weekend. And I had no idea what I was getting into. I did. I knew that I knew there was something going on there that I would never find at home. I was literally rubbing shoulders backstage now with people that I idolized from records I'd been listening to. It was a challenging gig because I was not a mandolin player, but they didn't know the difference. But I was thinking, if I'm doing this, I got to get good at this. They thought I was great, but in my head, well, I could get a lot better, and I did. But that's That's a further down the road. There came a point during the weekend when I saw Enoch sort of in his street clothes, jeans and a farmer's shirt. He was driving a pickup truck around the grounds because he was putting the festival on, so he was literally responsible for. He was working around the festival all weekend, and then playing at night and through the day and whatnot, right? Which also intrigued me. His work ethic was incredible, and he was a huge, powerful man, and he just seemed so nice to me. And he was a nice man. He was a very, very nice man, and so I saw him, and so I went down to where he was at the edge of the field, and I went down and I talked to him. This is after I'd played with him, the night before, and I think one more time during that Saturday or Sunday, whatever it was. And Johnny Balls of Steel. I mean, I should have changed my goddamn name. I went up to him, and halfway through this conversation, I just looked him right in the face and said, "How much do you think you could pay me if I moved here and played with you?" And it took him aback. He and in that gentle southern, avoidance they have down there of ever really saying anything head on. They're not very to the point there in any way about any topic, and he was just like, "Well, I reckon, I pay my other boys, this, that, another thing, and he's going on, and do you really think you'd like to come here, and I was like, yeah, sure, I'd love to come here, and I was shitting in my pants, as I thought for sure he'd turn me down. And then he goes, "Well, I reckon I could pay you like I pay everyone else, to pay $100 a week and give you room and board, and $100 a week for me at that point in my life. I didn't even know that was huge money for me. $100 a week with no expenses, right? I was going to be living. He said, "You can just stay with us, and we'll find you a place to stay." And and so I left that meeting, went back to Murray, and said, "I just got hired." And he goes, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, Enoch just said he'd hire me full time if I wanted to move here." And there was actually some talk at that time, that day, about me not going home, just staying there. But then I had my mother to contend with. And frankly, there was no way to call her in those days. I didn't have a calling card. I could have called collect, I guess, from a payphone or whatever, but there was not a conversation I was going to have over the phone. And of course, Murray would have caught hell for it from her, whatever. So, but there was actually discussion whether or not I was going to leave Wiggins, Mississippi, in Murray's car or Enoch's truck, right? Or they didn't have their bus there that weekend. But anyhow, so that's how it started. That's how everything started. And boy, it was a ride I will never forget, and it led me to places. It led me everywhere. That's where everything started. There wasn't one moment in my life where I could clearly say definitively that J.P. Cormier was invented, but that was it. And in those days, I didn't even go by that name. I introduced myself as John Paul, and because I always wanted to remember my dad, and so I took my middle name out after, when I started to perform. I grew up as John. When my first album came out, I became John Paul, and that's how they knew me, John Paul. That weird Southern inflection. That's John Paul. And we left there I had a level of excitement that was bordering on, insanity. I don't even remember the trip home. I don't remember it. I don't remember where we went after that. My brain was moving so fast with the possibilities of becoming, and I was going back home to go back into the 11th grade as well, right? So, yeah, it that actually might be wrong. I think I actually quit school to make this trip. But anyhow, that's another story. Anyhow, so there you go. We went home. We got home end of September, and that next January, when I turned 17, I made the move that would change the course of my whole life. I moved. I left from Bridgewater, and I moved to St. Stephen's, Alabama, to play with the Sullivan Family. And to this day, it's still one of the most treasured times of my life, the 10 years that would follow. And also some of the most horrendous, and just the things that I saw and did down there. It's that one part of my life could be an entire novel. Just those 9-10 years I spent from 85 to 94 and 95, 85 to 95. Could be a whole book unto itself. But I'll never forget it, and I'll never forget for the first time hearing the bluegrass version of Swing Low, Sweet Chariot. I'd always heard it and imagined it as a black spiritual, and heard it sung that way and slow and mournful. But when that banjo player, who modeled himself after Emmett Sullivan, actually, we all ended up modeling our banjo playing after Emmett. When he took off on that, it opened my eyes to the possibility of just how cool gospel music could be. I'll never forget it.